On February 16, 2005, a purple floppy disk arrived at KSACV in Wichita, Kansas. The return address was fake, but the sender was real. Someone who called himself BTK Bind. Torture, kill. For 30 years, this phantom killer had terrorized the community, claiming 10 lives before vanishing into silence. Now, after 13 years of quiet, he was back. What investigators didn't immediately realize was that the floppy disk contained a fatal mistake. Hidden in the digital metadata of a deleted church meeting agenda was a name: Dennis. The document was last modified by someone from Christ Lutheran Church. A simple internet search revealed that Dennis Rader served as president of that church council. When detectives drove past 6220 Independence Street in Park City, Kansas, they found a black Jeep Cherokee parked in the driveway, the same type of vehicle BTK had described in his recent letters. The quiet, middle-aged man who lived there had raised 2 children, worked as a compliance officer, and earned the respect of his community as a devoted church member and Cub Scout leader. But Dennis Lynn Rader was living the most elaborate double life in criminal history. By day, he enforced city ordinances and helped neighbors with stray animals. He organized church meetings and took scout troops on camping trips. By night, he meticulously planned the torture and murder of innocent families. For decades, he had walked among his neighbors, attended community events, and volunteered for civic duties, all while harboring fantasies that would culminate in 10 brutal killings. The man everyone thought they knew was actually one of America's most notorious serial killers, and he had been hiding in plain sight for over 30 years. Park City, Kansas, sits just north of Wichita, a quiet suburban community where neighbors know each other by name and families have lived for generations. In 2005, the tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes represented the American dream of safe, middle-class living. Residents took pride in following city ordinances, maintaining their properties, and participating in community organizations. Dennis Rader called this area home since the 1970s. Born March 9, 1945, he grew up in nearby Pittsburgh, Kansas. Before serving in the U.S. Air Force from 1966 to 1970, after his military service, he married Paula Dietz in 1971, and the couple settled into suburban life. Rader worked various jobs, including positions at Coleman Company and ADT Security Services, while Paula worked as a bookkeeper. The Raders appeared to embody community values. They attended Christ Lutheran Church regularly, where Dennis eventually rose to become council president. He volunteered as a Cub Scout leader, helped with church activities, and worked for the city of Park City as an animal control officer and compliance officer. Neighbors saw him as strict but reliable, the type of man who took rules seriously and expected others to do the same. By all outward appearances, Dennis Rader was exactly the kind of neighbor most people would want: stable, employed, family-oriented, and community-minded. The reign of terror that would define Dennis Rader's hidden life began on January 15, 1974, when he selected his first victims, the Otero family. Joseph Otero Sr., age 38, worked at the Cessna aircraft plant. His wife, Julie, 34, cared for their home and children, their son Joseph Jr., 9, and daughter Josie, 11. Were preparing for school that winter morning when Rader cut their phone line and broke into their home at 803 North Edgemore Street in Wichita. Rader had spent weeks studying the family's routines, noting when the father left for work and when the children departed for school. He knew the mother would be alone with the youngest children during a specific window each morning. His plan was methodical: break in, control the family through intimidation, steal items of value, and eliminate all witnesses. When Rader entered the Otero home, he carried rope, a knife, and a pistol. He told the family he was a wanted man who needed their car and money to escape. The deception was designed to keep them calm and cooperative while he prepared to kill them. He bound each family member with rope and cord found in the house, moving them to different rooms to prevent them from helping each other. Joseph Otero Sr. was tied and placed in the master bedroom, where Rader suffocated him with a plastic bag. Julie Otero was bound and strangled with a rope in the same room. Young Joseph Jr. was tied and bagged in his bedroom. 11-year-old Josie was taken to the basement, where Rader hanged her from a sewer pipe, later admitting he had become sexually aroused during her murder. After killing the family, Rader spent time in the house, eating food and exploring their belongings. He stole a watch and radio, but his primary satisfaction came from the act of control and killing itself. Before leaving, he cut the phone lines to delay discovery of the bodies. The Otero murders established the pattern that would define Rader's crimes for the next 17 years. He carefully selected victims, studied their routines, and planned each attack to maximize his control over the situation. His methods were consistent: break in, bind the victims, terrorize them, and kill them through strangulation or suffocation. On April 4, 1974, Rader attempted to kill 21-year-old Catherine Bright and her brother Kevin at their home on South Hydraulic Street. He posed as a detective and forced his way inside, tying both siblings up. When Kevin broke free and fought back, Rader shot him twice before he escaped. Catherine was not as fortunate. Rader strangled her with a nylon stocking and stabbed her. Multiple times before fleeing the scene, the BTK killer remained dormant for 3 years before striking again. On March 17, 1977, he killed Shirley Vian, a 26-year-old mother of 3, in her home on South Seneca Street. Rader locked her children in the bathroom before binding and strangling Vian with a rope. He spent time after the murder masturbating at the scene, revealing the sexual component of his crimes. His next confirmed victim was Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old secretary who lived alone on Pershing Boulevard. On December 8, 1977, Rader broke into her home and waited for her to return from work. He bound and strangled her with a belt, then called police to report the murder himself, directing them to the body. Rader's final 3 confirmed murders occurred in the 1980s and early 1990s. Maureen Hedge, 53, was killed on April 27, 1985. Rader broke into her home, strangled her, then took her body to a remote location where he photographed it in bondage positions before burial. Vicky Wegerle, 28, was murdered on September 16, 1986, in her home while her infant son was present. Dolores Davis, 62, was killed on January 19, 1991, making her BTK's final known victim. Throughout this 17-year period, Rader enhanced his crimes by sending taunting letters to police and media outlets. He provided details about the murders that only the killer could know, often including photographs of victims and personal items stolen from crime scenes. The letters were carefully crafted to demonstrate his intelligence and control over the investigation. The communications stopped abruptly in 1979, leaving investigators with no new leads for over 2 decades. During this period, Rader maintained his double life with remarkable discipline. He continued working, raising his family, and participating in community activities while the memory of BTK gradually faded from public consciousness. Unknown to everyone around him, Dennis Rader was successfully hiding his identity as one of Kansas's most notorious serial killers. Detective L.T. Ken Lonfair of the Wichita Police Department had spent decades pursuing the BTK killer, taking over the cold case in 1995 when he was assigned to head the newly formed investigative unit. Lonfair brought fresh eyes to evidence that had grown cold, and he understood that BTK's psychological profile suggested the killer was still alive and might eventually resurface if properly provoked. The investigation had been dormant since BTK's last confirmed communication in 1979. Over the years, hundreds of suspects had been investigated and eliminated. Police had received thousands of tips, analyzed countless pieces of evidence, and consulted with FBI profilers. But the killer remained elusive. The case files filled entire rooms containing crime scene photographs, forensic reports, and copies of BTK's taunting letters. Lontvaer's strategy was based on understanding BTK's personality. The killer had demonstrated a need for recognition and control through his letters and crime scene behavior. Profilers believed he was narcissistic and would be unable to resist the temptation to communicate if he felt his crimes were being forgotten or misrepresented. In 2004, Lontvaer decided to take a calculated risk. The 30th anniversary of the Otero murders provided the perfect opportunity to reignite BTK's interest in communicating. Lontvaer worked with local media to ensure extensive coverage of the anniversary, including interviews with surviving family members and detailed discussions of the unsolved case. The strategy worked perfectly. In March 2004, BTK broke his 25-year silence. The first new communication arrived as a letter to the Wichita Eagle newspaper. It contained photocopies of Vicky Weigell's driver's license and photographs from her. Crime scene evidence that had never been made public. The letter proved that BTK was still alive and wanted to reclaim ownership of crimes that some investigators had attributed to other killers. Over the following months, BTK sent 11 more communications to various media outlets and police. Each letter or package contained new evidence of his crimes and demonstrated his continued obsession with controlling the narrative of his killings. He provided details about murders that had been misclassified as accidents or attributed to other suspects. The communications revealed crucial information about BTK's personality and current circumstances. His writing style showed someone who is educated and familiar with police procedures. He referenced current events and demonstrated knowledge of how the investigation had progressed, suggesting he had been following news coverage of his case. Throughout the silent years, Detective Lontvaer assembled a task force that included FBI behavioral analysts, forensic experts, and digital investigators. They analyzed every word of BTK's communications, looking for clues about his identity, location, and psychological state. The killer's use of specific terminology and his knowledge of police procedures suggested he might work in law enforcement or a related field. The breakthrough came when BTK made a crucial mistake. In one of his letters, he asked police whether it would be safe for him to communicate using a floppy disk. He wanted to know if such communications could be traced back to him. In a calculated deception, Lontvaer had the media report that digital communications could not be traced, encouraging BTK to use the technology. On February 16, 2005, a purple floppy disk arrived at KSACV. The package contained the disk, along with a jewelry item and photographs, but BTK had made a fatal error. He had deleted a Microsoft Word document from the disk before sending it, believing it would be unrecoverable. However, forensic computer specialists were able to retrieve the deleted file. The recovered document was a church meeting agenda that contained metadata revealing it had been created and edited by someone named Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church. FBI computer expert Randy Stone was able to extract this information from the file properties, providing investigators with their first concrete lead in over 3 decades. A simple internet search revealed that Dennis Rader was president of the church council at Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. Investigators quickly located his address and began surveillance of his home at 6220 Independence Street in Park City. They observed a black Jeep Cherokee in his driveway that matched descriptions BTK had provided in recent letters. Background checks revealed that Rader fit the profile that investigators had developed for BTK. He was the right age, lived in the area during all the murders, and had worked for ADC Security Services, a job that would have given him access to homes and knowledge of security systems. His work history also included a position with the 1990 census, which would have provided detailed information about potential victims. The final piece of evidence came through DNA analysis. Investigators needed a sample of Rader's DNA to compare with evidence recovered from the Weigurel crime scene. But they could not legally compel him to provide a sample without probable cause. They solved this problem by obtaining a pap smear that Rader's daughter had taken at the Kansas State University Medical Clinic. The DNA analysis showed a familial match between the daughter's sample and genetic material found under Vicky Weigur's fingernails. This evidence, combined with the computer metadata and circumstantial evidence, provided sufficient probable cause for an arrest warrant. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested while driving near his home in Park City. He was pulled over by officers who initially told him there was a problem with his vehicle. When additional units arrived, Rader was informed that he was under arrest for the BTK murders. According to witnesses, he showed no surprise or resistance, calmly surrendering to officers. The arrest marked the end of one of the longest-running serial killer investigations in American history. For over 30 years, BTK had successfully hidden his identity while living as a seemingly normal member of his community. His capture was the result of his own arrogance and need for attention, combined with patient police work and advancing forensic technology. The arrest of Dennis Rader shocked the Park City community, but the full extent of his deception would only become clear as investigators began searching his home and examining his personal belongings. What they discovered revealed a level of calculated compartmentalization that was almost impossible to comprehend. Inside Rader's home, investigators found what they called his murderabilia collection, a carefully organized archive of items stolen from crime scenes. Photographs he had taken of victims and detailed documentation of his crimes. He had maintained this collection for over 30 years, storing it in his own house, while his wife and children lived unaware of its existence. The most disturbing discovery was a series of photographs that Rader had taken of himself during what he called his cooling-off periods between murders. These images showed him bound and posed in positions similar to his victims, wearing women's clothing and masks. He later admitted that these photographs were part of his sexual fantasies, and that he would pretend to be his victims during these sessions. Even more shocking was the revelation of how extensively Rader had integrated his murder fantasies into his daily life. Investigators found detailed maps and surveillance notes documenting potential victims throughout the Wichita area. He had been continuously scouting and planning additional murders, even during his supposed inactive periods. Several women in the community later realized they had been targeted by Rader, but had unknowingly avoided becoming victims. Through chance circumstances, the investigation revealed that Rader's job as a compliance officer for Park City had provided him with legitimate reasons to visit homes and photograph properties. Neighbors who had complained about his overzealous enforcement of city codes now realized he may have been using these visits to identify potential victims and study their routines. His behavior, which had seemed like bureaucratic overreach, was actually predatory surveillance. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery that Rader had maintained detailed project files for each of his murders, naming them with codenames like Project Lights Out for the Otero family and Project Fox Hunt for Nancy Fox. These files contained plans, surveillance notes, and post-crime analysis that demonstrated the methodical nature of his killings. He approached murder with the same organizational skills he brought to his legitimate work and community activities. The investigation also revealed that Rader had attempted several murders that were never connected to BTK. In 1979, he had broken into the home of Anna Williams, but she was not home when he arrived. He waited in her house for several hours before leaving, later sending her personal items to the media to taunt investigators. Williams, who was unaware of how close she had come to becoming a victim, had lived for decades not knowing that BTK had been inside her home. Investigators discovered that Rader's apparent dormancy between 1991 and 2004 was not due to satisfaction or retirement from killing, but rather because he was focused on other aspects of his fantasy life. During this period, he had escalated his voyeuristic activities and had been planning elaborate scenarios for future murders. He had identified specific victims and had developed detailed plans for their abduction and killing. The most shocking revelation concerned Rader's relationship with his family. His wife Paula and their 2 children had lived with him for decades, without ever suspecting his true nature. Paula later told investigators that Dennis had always been controlling and rigid about household routines, but she had attributed this to his personality rather than recognizing it as a reflection of his need to compartmentalize his double life. Rader's children were particularly traumatized by the revelations about their father. His daughter had been a student at Kansas State University when her DNA sample inadvertently provided the evidence that led to his arrest. His son had followed in his father's footsteps by pursuing a career in law enforcement, never knowing that his role model was one of the criminals he might encounter in his work. The investigation revealed that Rader had used his position as a Cub Scout leader to establish alibis for some of his crimes. Weekend camping trips with the Scouts provided him with witnesses who could testify to his whereabouts during periods when investigators knew BTK murders had been planned or executed. He had manipulated parents' trust in his character to create cover for his criminal activities. Even more disturbing was the discovery that Rader had been studying law enforcement techniques throughout his criminal career. His job at ADT Security Services had given him access to information about home security systems and police response procedures. He had used this knowledge to improve his methods and avoid detection, always staying one step ahead of investigators. The investigation also revealed that several unsolved murders and disappearances in the Wichita area might be connected to Rader. While he ultimately confessed to only 10 murders, investigators found evidence suggesting K had been responsible for additional crimes, K that had never been linked to BTK. Some of these cases had been classified as accidents or attributed to other suspects, allowing Rader to literally get away with murder. Perhaps the most shocking aspect of the revelations was how successfully Rader had maintained his public persona while committing horrific crimes. Neighbors, co-workers, and fellow church members consistently described him as normal, reliable, and community-minded. His ability to compartmentalize his life was so complete that even those closest to him never suspected the truth about his activities. The full scope of Rader's deception would take investigators months to unravel, but it became clear that Dennis Rader had been hiding the most elaborate criminal double life in American history, successfully fooling everyone around him for over 3 decades. The prosecution of Dennis Rader presented unique challenges for the Sedgwick County District Attorney's Office. Unlike most serial killer cases, there was no question about the defendant's guilt. Rader had been caught through undeniable forensic seed evidence and had already begun providing details about his crimes to investigators. The challenge was determining how to proceed with a case that had captured international attention and involved crimes spanning over 3 decades. District Attorney Nola Felston faced the decision of whether to seek the death penalty against Rader. Kansas had reinstated capital punishment in 1994. But Rader's murders had been committed before that date, making him ineligible for execution under state law. This legal technicality meant that the maximum sentence available was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Rader's defense team, led by public defender Steve Osborne, found themselves in an almost impossible position. Their client had been caught with overwhelming physical evidence, and he had already begun confessing to crimes in detail. Rather than mount a traditional defense, they focused on negotiating a plea agreement that would spare their client the trauma of a lengthy trial while ensuring he received life imprisonment instead of execution. The plea negotiations revealed another aspect of Rader's psychological profile. His need for attention and control extended even to his own prosecution. He insisted on pleading guilty to all charges and providing detailed confessions, but he wanted to do so in a public forum where he could describe his crimes in his own words. This desire for recognition played directly into the prosecution's strategy. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Rader appeared in Sedgwick County District Court to enter his formal plea. Judge Greg Waller presided over proceedings that would become some of the most disturbing court testimony in Kansas legal history. Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder, acknowledging his responsibility for each of the BTK killings. What followed was a methodical recounting of each murder, with Rader providing details that only the killer could know. He described breaking into the Otero home, binding the family members, and killing them one by one. He explained how he had stalked Catherine Bright and her brother, and how he had murdered Nancy Fox before calling police to report his own crime. Rader's courtroom demeanor was chilling in its calmness. He spoke about torture and murder in the same matter-of-fact tone he might have used to discuss city code violations in his job as a compliance officer. He showed no remorse or emotion as he described the final moments of his victims' lives, instead seeming to relish the opportunity to relive his crimes in a public setting. The victims' families attended the proceedings, many hearing details about their loved ones' deaths for the first time. Carmen Otero, whose parents and siblings had been BTK's first victims, listened as Rader described methodically killing her family members when she was just 14 years old. The Weigorel family learned that Vicky had been murdered by the same killer who had terrorized their community for decades. During the sentencing phase, family members were given the opportunity to address Rader directly. Their statements were powerful and emotional, describing the decades of pain and uncertainty they had endured while BTK remained unidentified. Many expressed relief that the mystery had finally been solved, but also anger at the casual way Rader described their loved ones' deaths. On August 18, 2005, Judge Waller sentenced Dennis Rader to 10 consecutive life terms in prison with no possibility of parole for 175 years. The sentence ensured that Rader would never be released from prison and would die behind bars. Waller noted that while Kansas law prevented him from imposing the death penalty, the sentence effectively guaranteed that Rader would never again have the opportunity to harm another person. Rader was immediately transferred to El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he was placed in protective custody due to concerns about his safety in the general prison population. His notoriety as the BTK killer made him a target for other inmates, requiring special security measures that would continue throughout his incarceration. The conclusion of the legal proceedings brought closure to one of Kansas's most notorious criminal cases, but it also raised disturbing questions about how someone could maintain such an elaborate deception for so many years. The community of Park City was left to grapple with the reality that they had lived alongside a serial killer who had successfully hidden his true nature while participating in their daily lives as a neighbor, church member, and community volunteer. The case of Dennis Rader stands as one of the most chilling examples of how a seemingly normal neighbor can hide the darkest of secrets. For over 30 years, he lived among his community as a trusted figure, a church president, scout leader, and civil servant who appeared to embody middle-class values and civic responsibility. Yet behind this carefully constructed facade lurked one of America's most methodical serial killers. Rader's ability to compartmentalize his life challenges our fundamental assumptions about recognizing dangerous individuals in our midst. His neighbors saw him as overly strict but essentially harmless. His church trusted him with leadership. Parents allowed him to supervise their children during scout activities. None of them suspected that the man they knew was capable of binding, torturing, and killing 10 innocent people. The BTK case raises uncomfortable questions that continue to resonate today. How well do we really know our neighbors? What signs might we miss when someone is determined to hide their true nature? The investigation revealed that even Rader's own family had no idea they were living with a serial killer, suggesting that the ability to deceive can be far more sophisticated than most people imagine. Dennis Rita remains incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he will spend the rest of his life. His case serves as a permanent reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, and that the quiet neighbor next door might be harboring secrets that would horrify those who think they know him.